Hi, I wanted to talk to you about pre-recording your next conference talk. The reason that people are moving towards pre-recording is pretty simple because most conferences have moved online, and the online conferences are really finding that there are a lot of technical issues that are the result of live connections, right? Like your internet failing at the last possible moment, your slides not working, whatever. Pre-recording removes all the technical risks and shifts it ahead of time, so that actually reduces the amount of stress for conference organizers. But it does increase the amount of work that needs to be done by speakers. So you not only have to be a developer, a content creator, a slide maker, whatever, you now also have to be a video editor and producer, and to have a sound set up, to have like a lighting set up, to have screens set up accordingly. There's a lot of things that you need to do. I've done my fair share of pre-recorded talks. I'm not an expert, and this is not a very nice room to do it in, but I wanted to do this video because I have 15 tips for you to share to pre-record your next conference talk. So let's get into it. You're probably wondering what that double snap sound was, and that's the way that you do edited video. So 15 tips let's play this back. To record your pre-record. You can see the double snap in the sound waves. So that's actually a nice, very visual indicator for you to delete this part like that. And you can play it back now and it will at least be a bit smoother. 15 tips for you to share to pre-record your next conference talk. So let's get into it. So the average video viewer will not even notice that you've just made a mistake, and you can continue not breaking your flow when you talk. I'm going to give you the bottom line out front because I'm going to throw a lot of tips at you, but there's one thing that I really, really care that you take away from this, which is, when in doubt, make it bigger. Make your code bigger, make your slides bigger, make your text bigger, make things bigger. Please understand that people have poor eyesight, or they may be watching your video on a small mobile screen. Make it bigger. Compared to all the other tips that I have to give you, this is how important make it bigger is, okay? So make it bigger. All right. With that said, I'm going to go into pre-recording your conference talk with 15 tips. There are 3 sections to what I think I advise people on. So the first is recording yourself. The second is recording your screen, which is the thing you're looking at right now. And third is editing your video after you've recorded both things. So let's get into it. The first tip is to write a script. It's better to have a script when pre-recording. I rarely have a script when speaking live. It's more natural to be able to improvise and command attention when not scripted. But the pre-recording restriction takes all the benefit out of speaking off script. So here, the expensive thing is now recording and editing. So you should try to reduce as much as possible the amount of editing you need to do. And that means trying out words and phrases in writing first when it's cheap, instead of taking a million cuts and improvising. Writing a script may feel like extra work, but trust me that it saves rather than adds time. You can still improvise, of course, like I am doing right now. I'm talking to you. I have a very natural conversation, but I still have a base to return back to because I have a script. And that means that I've really worked out the words and the way I want to phrase things to you before I commit them to audio. You should also try to front load value to get attention, because people have far shorter attention spans online than in person. They could be deciding whether or not to listen to your 30-minute talk, like this one, based on the first 30 seconds, which is, by the way, why I chose to have my face. Even though I don't look particularly interesting, people like to look at faces. They could be playing you in the background while working on something else. So, you may not have their full attention like you might in a regular conference. If you start out flat and monotone, I'm going to tune out. Grab attention. Use pauses, videos, cliffhangers, and whatever you can think of to get them to actually watch. Tip number 2, let's talk about lighting. This is bad lighting. This is better lighting. This is even better. Basically, make sure you have a diffuse light shone on your face. This is what it looks like when light is shone directly at me. So my face is too bright and too light. I'm bouncing it off of a white surface, so it's more diffuse, and that creates softer lighting. Tip number 3 is about backgrounds. This is okay. It's not the best. It's not terrible. But look at the screen. Let's change that. And look at that guitar. Basically, it's nice to have something simple in the background that represents your personality but doesn't distract from your overall talk. It's nice to have sometimes books or a bookshelf. I just don't have it in my apartment, and that's okay. And we all operate under constraints. Mine is I'm living with my parents during COVID. Tip number 4. Let's talk about the camera. What you're looking at right now is an external web camera. It's not a mirrorless DSLR like some people buy. This one only costs about $100 to $200. And this is the kind of quality you get from a typical MacBook Pro inbuilt camera that you get with the laptop. So you can compare the quality between this one that you're seeing right now, as well as the professional standalone camera. From everything that I read from experts, laptop manufacturers always cheap out on the built-in camera. So it behooves you to buy one of these, or if you really want to upgrade to something with DSLR, be my guest, but that's too expensive for me. Tip number 5 is the microphone, and this is maybe the most important one out of this entire section, because you can listen to a video with bad video, but you cannot listen to a video with bad audio. And so you may have noticed that I had varying audio quality in the previous sections, and that was actually not intentional. That was probably a demonstration of the different types of audio quality. There was a lot of noise, in some of the previous sections, and that was because I was recording from my MacBook microphone. And that's spinning up the fan according next to the MacBook. Here's an example of me recording right now, accidentally recording with the MacBook Pro microphone instead of the one that I have right in front of my face because I didn't check the settings. This I have right here is a Shure MB70, I think, microphone that was sent to me by the egghead.io team. I think generally you want to have your microphone as close to your voice as possible so you can pick up the most quality. But I like to have it a little bit off so that when I say P's and anything with plosives, I don't speak it directly and have p and pops into the audio. One of the problems with fixed microphones is that the audio levels are going to vary based on where you are physically. Like if I start speaking here, or if I start off in a slightly different position, I'm going to sound different. So you might actually want to get one of these lavalier microphones that are clip-on to your shirt, so it's the same distance wherever you go. I don't tend to move a lot, and I've trained myself to not move a lot, so I don't actually use these, but it's a good tip and it might help some people. Okay, so that was the first section about recording yourself, which is we covered script, lighting, background, camera, and microphone. And now we're going to talk about the second part, which is recording your screen. And obviously the first tip is to make it bigger, make everything bigger. I cannot stress this enough. Let's look at something that's typical on the screen if you do not optimize it. And you know the keyboard shortcuts to making things bigger, right? So try to do your readers the favor of make everything bigger. This also applies to code. This is the font size at which I typically code for my own work. But you may also wish to make this a lot bigger so that your readers and viewers can actually see what the hell it is you're trying to view. Try to make everything fit within one window. So here, I don't quite fit everything within one window, so I'm going to minimize it, and then now everything fits. So this minimizes the amount of scrolling. Scrolling is very distracting for viewers. You want to just have everything in one screen and no more than that. Tip number 7, make everything clearer. There's a lot going on this screen, and this is a normal screen for a lot of developers, where we can reduce the amount of distraction for our viewers and actually improve ourselves and make things easier for us to edit when the time comes. So the first thing to do is to set your dock to auto hide. So this just goes away. The second thing to do is look at this menu bar. We can actually go into our settings and turn off this thing. As a bonus, when you do any edits, you don't actually have the passage of time. So you can jump by 20 minutes and the user will be none the wiser. Then in your code editor, you can actually hide as many windows as possible. You can even go so far as to hide the activity bar in VS Code, so you have a very, very clean screen. If you want a shortcut for this, most IDEs have a Zen mode, so you can just toggle on Zen mode, and that is a nice little shortcut for that. But sometimes that can be overkill. Lastly, let's talk about recording your browser. Again, I have my font zoom in on the text that I actually want, but I have this little bookmarks bar here, which isn't really adding anything, so I can go ahead and hide that. And I also have my Chrome extensions here, which can be a little bit annoying. So I might want to just want to launch an incognito mode to get rid of that. But I can also set a different profile. So I can have a guest profile, for example. And here I just have no extensions loaded, and that doesn't interfere with anything that I do. So it can be nice to have a presentations profile just for recording. Tip number 8 is to mind your keyboard. I'm recording this on the MacBook Pro microphone just to let you know that everyone can hear you typing, because your fingers are literally right next to the microphone, the MacBook microphone. So try not to do that. Have an external mic. That improves your audio quality. That's another tip that we had. But also, if you use a mechanical keyboard and you like clicky-clacky, it can be very, 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 very annoying and noisy for people who are trying to listen to you talk while you type. So you may want to switch to a quieter microphone, or at least mind how much noise you're injecting into your typing. Tip number 9 is to do something with your face. So a lot of people have just their face in the bottom right corner of the screen whenever they're doing their talk, the entire talk. And that's actually very boring. Most of the time, no one's actually looking at you, so you might as well not have your face on there. You can use your face to create engagement, right? You can use it to actually make emphasis on the particular section of the talk that you're talking about. So here I'm talking about section 2, and then I can move to section 3. Or I can actually switch things around and talk about something with visual aid in the corner. There are a lot of ways you can handle this. I'm just trying to open your mind as to what you can do with your face on a video that you record. Tip number 10 is slides. You do want to use some slides, but you don't have to use slides all the time because you can code, and if you ever make a mistake, you can just edit. So you'll never make a mistake, and that's the major downside of live coding. So that's a big tip, which is you don't have to use slides all the time. I'm not using slides in this talk, but I do like using Google Slides. Slides.com is also very good. I've used some of these for some of my biggest conference talks. Apple Keynotes as well as Microsoft PowerPoint both have their strengths in terms of making professional slides. For example, typography is not a strong point of either of these web-based platforms, and you might be able to use other tools like Canva or Figma to do slides as well. The reason I keep coming back to Google Slides is because of this button, the share button, because people always want a link to your slides, and you can drop a link and have them clone it and share it, and it's a very nice experience compared to Keynote or PowerPoint. If you do use Google Slides, everyone is very familiar with the default slide templates, which are okay, but you can actually get pretty good free templates from Slides Mania or Theme Forest, where it actually looks a bit nicer. So here, for example, I was able to find a movie-themed slide deck for pre-recording conferences. So I could use any of these templates for making slides, and that just adds a little nice theme to it. If you're a web developer, you may want to build your own slides framework and actually design your slides in the code that you write. So for example, if you're a React developer, you might want to use Spectacle from Formidable Labs, which is actually a very well-maintained and very popular slides framework. This is very tempting, but the reason I don't recommend doing it is that the moment you run into bugs, you're spending time on code when you should be spending time on making your presentation better. So use the right tool for the job that's specialized for that. The one caveat, I guess, is if your presentation needs interactive components within your slides, then sure, embed a React component inside of your slides. I don't care. You probably don't need it. You can switch things in and out because you're pre-recording. Okay, so we just went through part 2 of all the tips. Make everything bigger. Again, make everything bigger. Make everything clearer by removing random noise on the screen. Mind your keyboard noise. Here I have a much quieter keyboard. You can barely hear it. Mind your face, or position your face and get creative with where you put your face, or not have your face on it at all. And slides, make them, don't overuse them because you're pre-recording, so your possible space of creativity just expanded tenfold. So don't use slides if you don't need them. But when you're using slides, get a custom slide design, or get something that's just free but not default Google Slides themes, and definitely don't use your own JavaScript slides framework. Okay, so we're almost done. We've got 5 more tips left on editing the video after you've recorded yourself, your screen. Now it's time to bring everything together and make the final product. So having good tools and knowing your tools well is a really good idea. I tend to use ScreenFlow. That seems to be the industry standard. It's $129, but you get a lot out of it. And for those who want a free and open source alternative, you can use Kdenlive, which I have never tried. I'm not the best video editor in the world. I'm not even a good one. So for some inspiration, I wanted to show you what I think a well-edited video looks like. So let's check out Rich Harris's Svelte Society conference talk to see what I mean. So let's take a look at how he starts his video. So that's a very high quality sort of B-roll type start that's very different from a typical conference talk and makes you sit up and pay attention immediately. And also, of course, you notice the background, you notice the high quality of the video. Everything that we just talked about in the previous tips applies here, and that's a very good sign. For an example, a really high quality B-roll, you might want to check out Sam Selikov's YouTube channel because he really puts a lot of effort into this. I don't recommend doing this for conference talks, but it's nice to have this in your pocket when the opportunity is right.
If you talk to anyone who knows, they'll tell you just how bad my... Now, don't get
So that's an example of really good editing, which I don't have. But I know enough to at least get my message across, and that's the most important thing. You don't have to be the world's foremost expert in video production to at least have effective pre-recorded conference video, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'm going to show most of my examples in ScreenFlow, but you can adapt this to whatever tool you happen to be using. We already talked about the layouts. Let me show you the layout, the fancy layout that I did. So the first tip is really about layouts, and we already covered that somewhat, so I'm just going to recap it again. In ScreenFlow, this is how the video that you just watched happened. So I'm just going to play it around. Or I can actually switch things around. Talk about something with visual aid. So this is how the layout looks under the hood. That we needed to switch around from this being the background and this being the foreground, the face being the foreground, to this video, this screen being the foreground and that screen being the background. You can get pretty creative with the layouts. You can check out the rest of this video for the other ideas that I've kind of squeezed in here alongside. But you know, I think layout is a important one because that determines the visual structure of how you're going to have your video come across to other people. So it's an important one to think about. I don't have much more tips here. If you have any other layout ideas, let me know. The 12 tips are going to be about transitions, and there's two transitions that you primarily see me using. So one is the fade, and this is pretty easy within ScreenFlow. So let's check out an example. Here I'm transitioning between two types of video. Presentations profile. Tip number 8. So that's a hard cut, and that can be a bit visually jarring. So if you want, you can actually just add an ending transition here and a starting transition here, and that will actually fade in and out. That tends to fade the audio together with the video, so you might want to separate the audio, so you can do something like detach audio, and this would not have the transitions of the audio, so this would at least have a nicer transition length to it. You can also, of course, shorten the amount of transition, and then as well as crossfade the transition as well, so this is how it looks, which is a much smoother transition. The other transition that you see me do a lot is the zooms, and I only recently learned how to do that. It's actually called actions inside of ScreenFlow, and the command shortcut for that is Command K, so I'm going to use that here. So let's say I want to zoom in on a particular part of this thing. I can just Command K, and that's the transition, and that will let me tween between two frames, right? So between here and there, I can just make the zoom. So that's a way to zoom. And it tweens basically any other property that you want to set. So that's how I did the opacity thing. I can do the rotation thing. There's a lot that you can do with cropping. Let's just make this, you know, like 500 down, and then down here. So that makes it a very dynamic video. So it's a very powerful piece of software. And once you're done, you can actually snap back the zoom. So this creates a nice reversal action. There you go. So those are the two transitions that I use quite a lot. There are obviously way more than that, but I think those two will stand you in good stead. Tip number 13 is to speed things up. So here's a demo of a Create React app. Okay, this is Sean from the future. That was a very long video, about 45 minutes of not doing anything. And it takes that long to get up a running Create React app. So one of the ways in which you can speed this thing up, because there's no sound going on, fortunately, is that you can actually cut it. So here I have some sound. And here is where I cut it. I want to go all the way till I hit enter. When I hit enter, I can hit yes, and here's where all the automated stuff happening, and I can just speed things up. So I can press T to cut these parts, and then hold Shift to speed it up, so that it just completes a lot faster. It's a much better watch. So that's how I do the editing here, and it's a very unfair advantage that you have when you're pre-recording a talk to speed up the boring parts, and of course to edit out any of the mistakes like the one I just did where it went to the start. My 14th tip is to superimpose text, And I'll let Rich Harris show you how to do it because he does it way better than anyone.
Does svelte scale? Like your x-axis on a chart is the number of components in your application, and the y-axis is the byte size of that app. Then svelte will start pretty low and then it'll sort of increase like that. Whereas if you had a more traditional framework, maybe it would start higher, but the incremental cost is lower, like the additional bytes per component is lower. So at a certain point you hit an inflection point where your app is going to be larger because you built it with svelte than if you had built it with another framework in theory.
My final tip is to leave breadcrumbs. It's pretty much guaranteed that people viewing your talk are going to have less of an idea of the argument and structure of your talk than you have. So you always have a clearer idea in your head of what you're saying than, and what's on video than your viewer. So it's helpful to give them visual aids to guide them along, especially for a long talk, like a 20 to 30 minute talk. That's much easier to lose track of than in like a 7 to 10 minute lightning talk. So this can be as simple as a table of contents slide like this one, which we've been coming back to constantly to remind you of the ground that we've covered and the ground that we have left yet to cover. But it can also be a little bit more creative. And this is a device that I use constantly in a lot of my pre-recorded conference talks. So for example, here is a talk I did on open source knowledge, where I presented the 4 parts of my talk, and I only colored out the ones which I'm talking about right now. So here I am talking about open source code. Here I'm talking about open knowledge, and this actually reminds you of the stuff that we just covered and the stuff that we're about to cover. And then here we're going to talk about the 4 sections, and then at the end I'm going to remind you of all the 4 sections that we covered just as visual hints. So this here is very subtle, right? Like I don't actually have any words to evoke it, but if you cover the content and tell the stories, it actually starts to tie the image together with the code. Here's another one which introduced a visual organization for organizing the React ecosystem. And it starts here at the bottom, and you can see the other parts that are kind of grayed out, but it gives you a sense of progression and returning to something familiar. And this actually helps you to understand how we're progressing and what we've already covered, so you don't lose track as you go along. And then it also gives you an opportunity to group things together like this, so you can explain supersets and broader structures, which are very interesting opportunities as well. I got this idea from Gary Bernhardt, so let's see him use this breadcrumbs technique in a talk.
User thinks it's running against the mailer, but in reality, the test system actually looks like this. There's only a mock and a stub. There's no user mailer involved. There's no user involved. So that is test isolation and test doubles, mocks, and stubs. There have been attempts to fix this, to solve this problem while keeping the benefits. One of them at large numbers of tests. So right now in this talk, everything is bad. There have been all of these sort of proposed solutions. None of them are convincing to me. They either solve only a small piece of the problem, or in the case of the integration test solution, it's really not a solution. It introduces other huge problems. To actually get to what I think is an actual solution, we have to switch gears entirely for a minute and talk about values. And by for free. Now, this is not the grand solution to everything, as you might have guessed. And to get to why it's not, let's quickly talk about the various programming paradigms. I'm going to talk about 3 of the big 4 because logic programming is too weird for me to talk about. So that is my example. I apologize I couldn't show you more of the code because I don't have time. But finally, I want to make a couple of connections to other ideas in the software industry in what may seem like very different ideas.
Okay, you get the picture. The ability to use breadcrumbs in your talk is extremely powerful for helping your viewers to keep the logical flow. And of course, because you're pre-recording, you can superimpose your breadcrumbs and help people track what you're talking about at any point in time, especially if they're scrubbing through the talk like you're about to do. So that's it. That's my 15 tips. Remember, I gave you a lot of tips and I gave you a lot of examples, and you're not going to master all of them for your first pre-recorded conference talk. If there's one thing that you take away, because it is the most annoying thing and it will make your talk useless for people who can't see it, make it bigger. For those who are interested in more advice from me, I did serve as a mentor for Global Diversity CFP Day last year, and I actually wrote some CFP advice for you. So you want to actually get the conference talk. This is my best brain dump of all the advice on how to get a conference talk slot. So good luck, all the best. You can reach out to me on my Twitter or my email, and I look forward to your pre-recorded conference talk. Good luck.